Hello, my name is Antonio Galladay. Here I have my guest, Bomani Obadeli. Thank you for tuning in to the Grand Boulevard Prevention Services. This is a live show. You can call at 312-738-1060. You can reach us at gbps2016@gmail.com. Phone number 312-588-3868. How are you doing today?
All right, Mr. Antonio. How you doing, brother man?
I'm fine.
All right, man. Appreciate you sitting in the hot seat.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me today.
I should say hot seat for me. Yeah, it's my pleasure, Antonio.
So, you are a community organizer, correct?
Correct. Long-time community organizer. I want to say that I've probably been a community organizer off and on for about 12 years.
12 years.
Yep.
What is inside of that 12 years? Can you tell me a little bit about your experiences in the community?
Yeah. So I started out as a youth coordinator with a Weed and Seed program, Youth as Resources, right? So Youth as Resources was a program that was funded through the MacArthur Foundation, through the National Crime Prevention Council. I actually was 18 years old, right out of high school, and working for Youth as Resources to go into low-income communities to train young people to become advocates and to get involved with community service projects. So the National Crime Prevention Council, through a Weed and Seed grant from HUD, was working in urban communities and public housings and housings across the nation. However, I ended up working in Robert Taylor for the most part, but the State Street corridor. So a part of the State Street corridor from 55th to 26th Street made up the quote-unquote State Street corridor, which encompassed Robert Taylor, Stateway Gardens, and Dearborn Homes, and even down to 24th, should I say, the Ickeys. And so we would my job was to go in and organize community, youth, and young people around creating community service projects. They were doing gardens from even way back then, and I'm talking about in the early 90s, they were doing parent patrols, youth patrols, and things of that nature. So, and then just over a period of time, I remained, I helped to organize two community-based organizations within Robert Taylor. I played a role with the Taylor Organization of Youth, which started down in the hole with Gladys McLaurin and David Bay, and then I ended up assuming a role down on Robert Taylor 5135, and then we transitioned from there to Harvest Holistic Services, where we worked in, which some people, if you're from Robert Taylor, you would know the cluster buildings during the phase of Robert Taylor when they were demolishing the buildings, right?
All right.
And then we transitioned down into the Dearborn Homes community, which, you know, as a former resident of both public housing complexes, Robert Taylor and the Dearborn Homes began to work with youth down there in the Dearborn Homes community.
Oh, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Just during your time, well, how long have you been in Grand Boulevard?
You know what? I off and on, I want to say pretty much all my life, man. I mean, I've lived, like I said, I lived in public housing. I've lived on 43rd in Michigan. I've lived at where I currently live, 37th around King Drive now, and of course I lived in Dearborn Homes as a young person, as a child, Robert Taylor, and then as a mature adult, I've lived on 43rd in Michigan and on Drexel on 48th Street. So I've spent pretty much all my life in the Grand Boulevard. I think I've been a suburbanite for about, I would say, a collective time of 2 years. Not that I'm very proud of that, but I've lived in the south suburbs for probably 2 years of my whole entire life. But so for the most part, I'm 44 years old, soon to be 45. Pretty much I can say I pride myself on being a lifelong Grand Boulevard resident and a diehard Cub fan, as you can see. I know some people say, well, that's kind of strange, but we won't delve off into that.
So with the Grand Boulevard Prevention Services, we are aware of the the violence in the community and the drinking and the drugging of the youth. Can you dab a little bit into that and tell me your thoughts on that?
Well, Antonio, I got to tell you, it's a very complex thing, right? So, Grand Boulevard, over a period of time, has seen this series of problems, from the object poverty to, failing schools to dilapidated housing, and that's just one side of it, right? So,
Right.
And then it's had its good parts through, I would like to say, through gentrification, the community has changed. But as it relates to drugs and violence, we certainly have our pockets, right? So when you look at areas like 51st Street between Michigan and King Drive, when you look at 47th Street between Michigan and Vincennes, when you look at areas like 43rd Street, which is a small pocket basically between Michigan and King Drive. When you go down 39th Street, it's ironically sad to say, between Indiana and King Drive. And when you go to 35th Street, the same, kind of between Michigan, where even police headquarters, and King Drive. We have these small pockets, and then to an extent over in the Fuller Park community and in there, but we just have some pockets of in the Grand Boulevard community where there's been generational unemployment, youth
Right.
unemployment, generational poverty, generational mental illness that has transferred down from family to family, and therefore has impacted the young people in those communities. And so you have young people selling drugs, you have young people and older people selling loose cigarettes. We have a few bad businesses who are just not good businesses in the community as it relates to dealing with the population. So I can't say that a lot has changed since the buildings are no longer there. Now you got these scattered populations of replacement housing or mixed income housing, and I'm all for that because I believe that poor people should have the opportunity to live in a vibrant and decent community. But unfortunately, because of, in my opinion, the level of budget cuts and the lack of social service and the lack of divestment and investment in these communities, you have these issues of drugs and violence and poverty, man.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
1 second, we have a caller.
Sure, we'll take it. Go ahead. Caller, you on the air. Oh,
yeah.
I should say you should have brought him on. I forgot I'm not the host.
How you guys doing today?
Good.
Fine, how are you?
You mentioned gentrifying, and I want to know, do you think there's any solutions to gentrification?
Well, I got to be honest with you, caller. Yes and no. So to the extent that I think that the Grand Boulevard community is going to become more gentrified, right? So with the level of vacant lots that exist within the community, is ripe for prognosticators, or is ripe for developers to partner with people who are forecasting what the community 5 to 10 years would look like. So to that extent, gentrification could be bad and good in some instances, right? Listen, I always believe that people, indigenous folks who lived in the black belt of the city of Chicago, should be allowed to stay there and live there. But it's becoming more challenging in these days. And certainly the violence and crime, even though small, plays a role in that, right? And so, it's a situation where when you neglect the community, where you don't provide resources, where there aren't jobs, and you have high unemployment, it breeds crime and trauma and drama and so many other negative adjectives. So, in a sense, I would say some may think that gentrification is good, some may think it's bad. I'm torn with it. I would say that. I think there's good gentrification and there's bad, right? So the good gentrification, this is just my opinion, I'm speaking for myself, is when you have African American professionals move back into communities that was once blighted and blighted and poor, and they integrate themselves in the community and they stay there so that perhaps they're giving an example to other families of what you can achieve. Bad gentrification is when anybody other than the people who will predominantly live in those communities are coming and moving into those communities, and specifically white folks and others who move into these urban communities, and they begin to take over and change the culture integrity of that community.
We have another caller on the air. Caller?
Yeah, I'm glad to see you again, my man. From your show, when you're on it, I call you because you're honest, and I want to know an honest answer.
Sure.
What neighborhood have you seen grow or get better when African Americans take over? None. But I'm going to tell you why. You hit it right on the mark. You need all the so-called entrepreneurs get together. Start slow, buy a block here, buy a block there, give our people a chance, and you'll see. It'll be a lot easier.
Well, let me say this to you.
On the corner.
Let me say this to you, with all due respect. I will say to you that you can look at areas and communities where, so I'll take you to West Chatham, and I'll take you even parts of East Chatham, where Chatham may have seen its spurts of crime, but those are thriving communities where African Americans are actually running those communities. I mean, for the most part, you have very influential African Americans who are living in Chatham, and you certainly have a black political representation there. You have probably our largest amount of African American businesses are in the Chatham community. Now, I would even go to the 4th Ward in Hyde Park. Now, it is a mixed community, don't get me wrong, but it's African Americans who live there who are thriving. So I just think that, listen, we have troubling parts in this city. And there are far too many African American communities, I would agree with you, that are not doing as great as others, right? And so the challenge would be to those of us who know to try to help mitigate that. But I don't want to say that there's no black community where African Americans are in charge and they're failing, because I point to Chatham as being one of those communities, and I think we're doing quite well there. And I would even also say there are some parts of the in the 21st Ward where African American middle class, that belt, is doing quite well, and that's along 95th Street. I think maybe it's called Washington Heights. There are African Americans in the Pullman community, East Pullman, that I think that are thriving. Middle class black folks who are teachers, policemen, and firemen, and even pockets. So I'll say this. As it relates to the Grand Boulevard community or the greater Grand Boulevard community, the Gap community down on from 35th to 31st, and from State Street to King Drive, you have a belt wave of African Americans professionals, and you have 2 black elected officials who share that community, and it's doing quite well. Certainly, again, there's some challenges. Don't get me wrong, but they're thriving, and it's all a work in progress. But I here's what I know, right? Here's the fact that we can't negate. African Americans have the highest unemployment rate than any other race in this state, right? And black youth unemployment is somewhere around 50 to 60%, and there's 7 communities where it's at like 70%. So I do believe that poverty and crime there's a direct correlation between the two of those. So I'm sorry to cut you off, but that's my spiel on that, caller.
All right. Well, I think there were some good points in there. I wanted to point out, you mentioned that challenges would arise in communities as such. Do you have any, so to say, solutions that could possibly help the community in a positive manner?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things as a solution. Number one, we need jobs, right? we need real job training programs, which is a pathway to employment. We need, mental health services. I think a lot of our people are suffering from post-traumatic stress and the trauma from living in second generational of poverty-stricken situations, the lack of unemployment, the lack of really a solid family structure. And so in the intermediate, I think that government can bring trade schools back into the city, right? We need access to the trades. We need to, listen, you got 50 or 60 cranes downtown in the city of Chicago. We need to have a workforce that's prepared for that. We're moving into a technology-driven society. We need to make sure that African American youth in the elementary stages are being trained and pushed in a technology industry. We need technical and technology-driven high schools, right? We need to instill a greater sense of pride and a sense of civility back into our communities as well. So as solutions, it would be jobs. It would be personal responsibility. And it would be access to capital for the businesses that are there as an investment because small business are the biggest employers of folks in the community. And so those are some of the things that I think could be very successful.
Okay. Caller on the air? Caller?
Yes, thank you for the answer to the last one. You're 100% right what you said after I said. We need jobs, stuff like that. You have 70 cranes working downtown right now, hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars. And there's not one African-American crane and not one Hispanic crane, American-American, going by itself. So, and when you keep Ron in office, you keep the so-called African-American parliament, and what happens? Not a thing. We got to start, the whites and other people, we got to start putting people in there that are going to help us, not keep us back. You talk about boot strings. I don't even have the strings to pull up my boots anymore. That's how many times they've broken. But anyway, thank you. Great show, and go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, listen, I agree with you. I think that the mayor could be doing some things differently and better. I will say that. And even though the city council some years ago passed a law that says that any project that's receiving over $25,000 in city money or TIF money or government funding, that they have to have union workers on those sites. The bigger issue is that African Americans are not participating in the labor workforce, and the labor unions have to do better, and we have to be better prepared. And so I went to Tilden Tech. I mean, I transferred from DuSable, and I went to Tilden. We had automotive, we had electrician, we had carpentry. You're hard pressed to find much of that in any schools. I believe Simeon and Dunbar may be the only two schools on a smaller level that have technical programs. Everyone's not going to go to college, and so we still need people who understand masonry, who understand bricklaying, who understands carpentry, who understands electronics, who understand pipe fitting, who understands welding. We had welding schools here. And so that is the biggest challenge for us. And so I would agree with you to an extent, yeah. But I will say there are more Latino folks working on those sites than there are African Americans. So my solution is deal with the unemployment problem in the city of Chicago. In fact, the state of Illinois. But since we live in Chicago and Cook County, we have a crisis. It is embarrassingly high, the unemployment rate in this city, in this county, among African Americans. I mean, there are people fighting for Uber jobs. I mean, Uber and Lyft. It is ridiculous. And it's a sad commentary when we sit back as so-called leaders and watch the hemorrhaging and the pilfering, and deprivation economically and educationally and socially of our community, and we say nothing about it. That is more hurting and embarrassing to me. But I digress. This ain't my show.
We have another caller on the air. Caller.
Listen, I totally agree with you saying. That's the problem. They don't even the playing field. Back in the day, we had schools that taught you trades, taught you how to do things. And certain other culture, they come here, they take the job for a lesser price, and then they teach them on the job. Well, now these days it's not being done that way. We need to have technology. We have to have knowledge. That's what we need so we are able to do jobs. Labor manual is a dead thing. Labor manual is what you do in your house. It's not what you do at work. So again, that's what we need to be. We need to talk. We need to be taught certain things. We need, just like you say, there's too many people walking around that have lost their minds. We need help. If we could do that, we'd be okay. If you don't know no better, you can't do nothing. So we need to get up out of our butts and start learning. Thanks for taking the call.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I agree with you to an extent, probably 90% of what you said. But I would also say, Antonio, you come from a generation that I believe that has this greater sense of entitlement, right? That maybe I'm like could be your father, so you like to be my son, and so there's a greater sense of entitlement from your age group that think that you're entitled to this utopia and this great life, and you want the paycheck and the big house and the big car, but I question, are you willing to put the time and energy into working? And that's probably for another day and another conversation because we're up against the clock. But I just wanted to add that as, as a part of the discussion.
No, I definitely agree with that statement.
Yeah.
I believe that a lot of the youth don't want to work for anything anymore. And a lot of things are silver spoon fed and hand given to us. So that was a true statement if I hadn't heard one all day. So.
Well, that's my closing statement. Until next time.
Thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you, man.
To Grand Boulevard Prevention Services. Thank you for joining me today as well.
No, thank you, young man.
You all can reach Grand Boulevard Prevention Services at gbps20162016@gmail.com. Phone number 312-588-3868. I'm with the Grand Boulevard Prevention Services, and thank you all for joining us today.